We pulled into the woods just before sunset. We were about 20 minutes in when we finally found our campsite. It was perfect. It looked exactly like the one from the guidebook, except for one thing. There was no one there. I'd reserved this site weeks ago. It was marked as occupied on the reservation list all the way up until today. And yet, when we got here, we were the only car in the parking area. I thought it was strange, but I figured that maybe people had gotten scared off by the rain earlier in the day. We set up camp and made ourselves comfortable, and soon enough it was time for dinner. While my friend went to the bathroom, I took some sticks from the fire pit and made sure that they were smoldering before placing them. Back in the center of the ring, when he came back, we got our food out and started eating in silence. I kept glancing over at the fire, making sure it looked natural. I didn't want anyone coming across our campsite and thinking that we were still here. It was after our meal that I noticed some more strange things. There was a sharp piece of wood near the tent, and I assumed that it was something that I had stepped on earlier. But then, I saw the small indentations in the soft dirt surrounding it. Someone had taken the time to chop it so that it was flat. Then there was the fire itself. Even though it had been smoldering for a while, there were no hot embers anywhere. It was like someone had poured sand on it and put it out. Finally, under the tarp next to the fire pit, I could see the outline of a backpack. When we set up our tent, we put our bags on top of it so that we could use the tarp as a ground sheet. This is pretty standard practice if you don't want animals getting into your stuff in the middle of the night. So I unzipped the bag, which made me jump when suddenly a small rock fell onto my shoulder. I checked inside the bag, but there was nothing there. As I looked around, I realized that it was probably the same rock that had been lodged in the side of the bag when we packed it. But that still didn't explain why it was sitting right above my head in the middle of the tent. With all of these strange things happening, we decided to pack up and leave. But we were already running late, so we quickly dismantled the tent and threw our bags into the back seat. We got into the car and started driving away, trying not to think too much about the campsite. We were almost at the main road when my friend turned to me with a serious look on his face. "You know," he said, "we should go back. It doesn't seem right to leave without letting whoever was there know that we arrived." I knew what he was talking about. There was a backpack, for God's sake. But I wasn't having it. "Dude, it's getting dark. There's no way I'm going back there tonight," he sighed. "All right, well, at least let's take the tent with us. I don't want some animal getting into it," I agreed, but warned him that if we found anything else, we were leaving immediately. As we pulled back into the parking area, the sky had darkened to the point where it was almost black. All I could make out were the shadowy forms of the trees surrounding us. The minute that we stepped out of the car, I felt uneasy. I told my friend that we needed to search thoroughly because if there was someone out there who had wanted to hide their presence, they would have succeeded. Well, at least they would have if we hadn't found their backpack. We spread out the tarp and began looking through the bag. There was some camping equipment along with clothes, shoes, and a large knife. There was also a notebook with several pages torn out. I flipped to the last page and saw the date of the most recent entry. It was 2 days prior. That's when I heard it. It was a loud bang that seemed to come from the woods behind us. My heart started racing and I instantly regretted going back. My friend grabbed the flashlight and shined it towards the noise, but we couldn't see anything. "Hello," I yelled, my voice cracking. "Is anyone out there?" Of course, there was no reply. We waited for a moment longer, but when we didn't hear anything else, we decided to leave. We packed up the tent and headed back to the car. Just as we got inside, we heard a loud crash followed by footsteps in the direction of our campsite. "Let's get out of here," I whispered to my friend, and he agreed. We started the engine and drove away slowly, keeping our eyes on the rear view mirror. For a while, everything was silent. Then we started hearing what sounded like heavy footsteps running alongside our car. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator and we sped away. Still, the footsteps continued. At this point, they were definitely close behind us. Then we started hearing what sounded like screams in the forest. They were loud and echoed in the trees. I gripped the steering wheel and turned to look out the passenger side window. I could just barely make out the shadowy form of something running through the trees. Whatever it was moving fast. We were almost at the main road, and that's when we heard a loud bang on the car. I screamed, and my friend slammed his foot down on the brake. We turned on our headlights and looked back, but we couldn't see anything. We waited for a moment, but when nothing else happened, we drove away as fast as we could. We were both quiet as we drove the rest of the way home. Every time we stopped at a red light, we checked to make sure that we were alone in the car, and every time we heard a car approaching, we panicked. It wasn't until we pulled into my driveway that I breathed a sigh of relief. The next morning, I woke up feeling better than I had the night before. After everything that we had experienced, I was surprised that we hadn't called the police, but I suppose that we were both still in shock. I got out of bed and walked into the kitchen to make some breakfast. That's when I noticed my phone on the counter. I picked it up and saw that I had received a text message from my friend. It read, "You won't believe this," followed by a photo. I clicked on the image, which showed a campsite identical to the one that we had stayed at the night before. It was clear that this was his way of saying that he had seen something, but what was it? A few hours later, I got another text. This one simply said, "There was no one in the car," accompanied by a picture of the driver's seat. Then came the last message. It read, "He was sitting in the back the whole time," followed by a photo of the back seat. And then I saw it. There was an indent in the seat as if someone had been sitting there. But how? We had driven back to the campsite in the middle of the night. Whoever was in the back seat had never left. I've been working non-stop for months, between my day job and then also creating content. I just haven't taken any time to relax and decompress. So earlier this month I decided that enough was enough. I needed some alone time to just get away from it all. So I did something that I hadn't done in a long time. I went camping. I packed up the car and drove 3 hours away to a secluded campground in the woods. It was isolated and miles away from any neighbors. It was perfect. I pitched my tent, made a fire, and then settled in for the night. Within minutes I was asleep. That is until around a.m. when I woke up to what sounded like footsteps outside of my tent. At first I thought nothing of it. Maybe it was just a branch or an animal. But then the sounds continued. Footsteps were circling around my tent. They were very faint, but they were distinct. They sounded like a man's shoes, but I couldn't make out any details because they were so far away. It was almost as if the person was walking. On the other side of the forest, the footsteps were soft, like the person was trying not to make any noise. But every once in a while, one of the steps would be louder than the others, which made me jump in my tent. I tried to ignore the sound and go back to sleep, but after a few minutes, I noticed that the footsteps had stopped, and I wasn't sure if that was better or worse. A minute later, I heard a twig snap directly outside of my tent. That was followed by a loud rustle in the bushes. Whatever was out there was getting closer. I don't know why, but at that moment it occurred to me that I should probably have brought a gun. I'm a city boy through and through. I've never hunted and I don't even know how to use a gun, but still, maybe I should have brought one. I sat in my tent listening intently, waiting for whatever was out there to approach the tent, but only silence came. I was just about to go back to sleep when I heard those footsteps again. This time they were much louder. Whatever was out there was now walking directly around my tent, and I could hear its breathing. It was getting closer. I started to panic. What if it was a bear? I live in fear of bears. I mean, growing up in the city, the only bears I'd ever seen were in the zoo. I have no idea what I would do if a bear attacked me. And it was at that moment I wished that I had someone with me. I wish I didn't have to deal with this alone. I tried yelling, but my voice sounded pathetic and weak. I tried shining my phone's flashlight outside the tent, but all that did was blind me. By this point, the footsteps had stopped and everything was silent. But that wasn't a good thing. When it was quiet, I could hear my own breathing, my own heartbeat. All I could hear was me, and that was terrifying. Whatever was out there seemed to be waiting. And after a few moments, the footsteps began again. This time they were right outside my tent. It was going around the tent in circles. It sounded like the person was pacing. Then suddenly the footsteps stopped. I froze. Was whatever was out there watching me, waiting for me to fall asleep again? The next sound that I heard was the zipper of my tent being pulled open. I screamed and buried my head under my jacket. I don't want to know what was out there. I didn't want to see it. But then the zipper closed and I heard the footsteps begin again. Whatever was out there was gone. I sat in my tent for a few more minutes, frozen in fear. Eventually, I started to calm down and I fell back asleep, although I didn't get much rest. Every few minutes I'd wake up and listen intently for any noise, but only silence greeted me. I don't know how long I slept for, but eventually the sun began to rise, and that's when I finally got out of my tent. I was nervous that whatever was out there would still be around, but as I unzipped the tent and looked out into the forest, I saw nothing but trees. I walked around the tent to see if anything had approached too close, and that ease when I saw it. Imprinted into the dirt surrounding my tent were dozens of small footprints. They were barefoot. Footprints. Whoever or whatever was out there was walking barefoot. I immediately called my friend who I had told about where I was going. He picked up on the second ring and I asked him, "Hey, can you send me the coordinates of where you are?" "What? Why?" "Just send them to me." He sent them to me without question, and when I opened them, I realized that I had given him the wrong coordinates. I was 6 miles away from his camp. No wonder I hadn't heard anyone else out here. I was completely alone. I quickly packed up my stuff and got the hell out of there. As I was driving away, I looked at the GPS coordinates again. I was 6.2 miles away from my friend's camp, so whoever or whatever was out there was within 6.2 miles of where I camped. At first, I thought that maybe I had somehow hallucinated the entire thing. Maybe I was so overworked that I had created some sort of psychotic break. But then I looked at the pictures that I had taken of the footprints around my tent and I found something odd. There was a strange pattern to the way that they were arranged. In some places, the footprints were going around in circles. In others, they were imprinted in straight lines. It didn't look random. It looked purposeful. And it was at that moment that I knew that I never wanted to go camping again. I drove straight home, stopping only for gas. It took me 3 hours to drive there, but the whole way back, I kept replaying the events of the previous night in my head. I tried to come up with a logical explanation for what happened. Maybe someone had snuck into the campground and was stalking me. But then why would they walk around my tent without actually coming inside of it? They could have easily killed me while I was sleeping. I would have been defenseless. Or maybe it was an animal. A big cat maybe. But cats don't walk in circles and leave footprints in the dirt. Plus, I would have felt the ground shake as it walked by. As I got closer to home, my phone began to die. I glanced down at it and noticed that I had a text message. It was from my friend. He was asking if I wanted to go hiking tomorrow. I quickly replied, saying no when I got home. I immediately went to the shower and shaved all the hair off of my legs and arms. Then I put on some lotion. I was itchy all over. I don't know if it was from the dirt or from the fact that I hadn't shaved in months. Either way, it felt good to be clean. I spent the next few days at home catching up on sleep and watching movies. I was exhausted. I couldn't focus on anything work-related, so I just gave up and rested. A part of me wants to go back to that campground and find out what was out there, but the rational part of me knows that that's a bad idea. There's no way that I'd survive a second night out there. It was one of those perfect nights where every single thing could have gone wrong, but nothing did. We had a great spot, a fire going, food cooking, music playing, good conversation. It was everything you would want out of an evening in the Beartooth Wilderness. I should preface this story by saying that my friend Mike is one of the most calm and collected people that I know. So when he gets spooked, it must be pretty bad. This was probably about an hour into our trip, and we were sitting around the fire eating some freeze-dried meals. Suddenly, we both looked up from our plates and saw a pair of headlights cresting the hill towards us. We knew it was probably just another couple of campers heading to their site not too far away. But the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. That late in the evening, it was probably 9:30 or so, most people had already settled into their tents for the night. Those headlights came to a stop right outside the light of our fire. We couldn't see anything except 2 points of light shining right at us. And then a shape began to take form just outside the range of the firelight. What I'm about to tell you is completely true, but it sounds crazy. And honestly, I can't even explain it. This man appeared out of nowhere, just kind of standing there looking at us. He didn't say anything, he just stood there. At first I thought he was a ghost. His skin was really pale, almost translucent, like his skin had been bleached of color. The strangest thing was that he wasn't making a sound. He just stood there eerily still, kind of swaying slightly in the firelight. I don't remember what I said exactly, but I asked him if he needed help or if he was lost or something. And still he didn't answer. He just kept standing there. It was like he was a scarecrow come to life. The fire was probably only about waist high, so he wasn't blocking much of the light coming from the flames. But there was something about the way he was standing in front of it, his outline being illuminated by the firelight. It was like it cast some kind of eerie glow on his face. And because of the darkness, all I could really make out was his eyes. They were two glowing embers in the blackness, just staring straight at me. I tried to get Mike's attention, but it was one of those moments where it was hard to look away. There was something so unnerving about the silence. It was like the quietest place that I'd ever been in my entire life. Even the crickets seemed to fall silent, which in the wilderness is like a sure sign that something is up. My mind started to race. Was he a mountain lion? Could he see us? Should we pack up and leave? Why was he just standing there? So many thoughts were running through my head, but he still just stood there silently watching us. What felt like an eternity was probably only a few minutes. And then he took a step forward. He took a step into the light of the fire, and it revealed something. His face, well, what was left of it, was covered in some kind of netting. I don't want to be too graphic here, but it looked like someone had taken a piece of cloth or something and wrapped it around their head in a sort of makeshift turban. Maybe he had a medical condition or something. Maybe he had been in an accident. But whatever it was wrapped tightly around his head and face. I felt a sense of relief mixed with revulsion. For some reason, seeing his face, or what was left of it, kind of ruined the mystery for me. As soon as I saw that, I knew he was human. And if he was human, then he could do damage. I don't think I've ever run through so many scenarios in my head in such a short period of time. One minute he might be rabid and foaming at the mouth, and the next he might pull out a knife and start stabbing us. I told Mike, let's just get in the tent, right? Let's go now. But as I was packing up my things, I noticed that he had taken another step forward and he was still just standing there. I looked over at Mike and he was watching the guy too, of course. But I could tell by the way his eyes were wide and the way he was gripping his trekking pole that he was nervous. I finished packing up my stuff as quickly as I could, and then I motioned for Mike to grab his stuff and let Ease just get in the tent. As we were unzipping the tent, he still hadn't moved. At this point, I was starting to feel a little bit angry. Whatever this guy wanted, I was assuming that he was going to try and get it, and I also assumed that whatever it was, I didn't want it. The fire was dying down now and it was getting dark. We were almost in the tent and I told Mike to hurry up. As we crawled into the tent, I could still see the man standing there. He hadn't moved, and as we crawled into the tent and zipped ourselves in, we heard him make a noise. It was very soft, like a low whisper. It sounded like he was breathing, but it was definitely a human sound. Mike and I looked at each other. There was no way anyone else was out here. We were deep in the Beartooth wilderness. There was no one else for miles. So where did the sound come from? Who was out there? I listened intently. There it was again, a soft whispering sound just outside the tent, and it was coming from all sides. I could hear it above me, below me, to my right, to my left, all around me. It was like someone was breathing right outside the tent, just on the other side of that thin nylon fabric, brushing up against it, whispering into it, breathing into it. And then it stopped. Mike and I held our breaths, waiting to hear if it would start up. Again, I don't think either of us had said a word the entire time that man was outside our tent. But now that he was gone, I found myself whispering, "Is he gone? Is he really gone?" And then it started up again. He was back there, breathing into the tent, whispering into the tent. It sounded like he was trying to get our attention, like he wanted us to know that he was there. But why? What did he want from us? I pulled Mike closer into the tent and I put my arm around his shoulder. At this point, we had two options. Either we sat there and waited until morning and hoped that he would go away, or we packed up and left and hoped that we didn't run into him out there in the dark. Neither of us wanted to go out there, but neither of us wanted to stay in the tent either. It was like a standoff, and I don't think either of us slept a wink the rest of that night. We stayed huddled together in the tent listening to the whispering and breathing just outside of it. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined the man outside the tent prying it open and reaching inside with his glowing embers for eyes. Every time I opened my eyes, I looked for the outline of his body standing in the firelight, swaying slowly and breathing heavily. I could hear him moving around outside the tent, dragging something heavy along the ground, like he was trying to get closer, like he was trying to get in. All these thoughts and images ran through my head, and Mike was just as scared as I was. We could hear him shuffling around outside the tent, and then suddenly he stopped, whatever he was doing out there. He stopped, and then he was quiet. We were silent, and we waited for what felt like an eternity. I could hear my own breathing, loud in the quiet of the tent. And then I heard his breathing again, close to the tent, right outside the tent. He was back there, and this time it sounded like he was whining, like he was in pain. I've heard a lot of animals in the wilderness, but I've never heard anything like that before. It was a low, guttural whine, like something in pain, and then he was silent. Again, in the morning, after, of course, not sleeping at all, we unzipped the tent and looked out into the forest. It was beautiful. The sun was shining through the trees. Birds were singing. It was a perfect day in the Beartooth Wilderness, and there was no sign of the man. We looked all around the tent, but we didn't see any footprints or any indication that he had ever been there. I swear to you, that entire night, everything that happened, it felt so real, and it's something that has stuck with me for years, even now. Whenever I hear a noise in the middle of the night, I think of that man and his glowing ember eyes. And sometimes when I'm hiking in the woods, I half expect to turn around and see him standing there in the firelight, breathing heavily and whispering to me.